The first commandment, the greatest commandment, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Now, a lot of people have suggested that this command to love heart, mind, soul, and strength points to the four different dimensions of our being. And we speak of our loving God with our soul. We are speaking of our spiritual dimension. Each one of us is a spiritual being. When we speak of loving God with all our heart, we think of our emotional dimension. We're emotional beings, communal beings. When we think of loving God with all our mind, we think of ourselves as intellectual beings. And when we think of loving God with all our strength, we think of ourselves as physical beings. And over the years, a lot of people who have commented on healthy living or these different self-help books, they said this is a really good way to prioritize things in your life. The most important dimension is the spiritual dimension. That's the first. You have to have a good, healthy spiritual life. Now, we as Catholics, especially Catholics who come to weekday Mass, typically we have this pretty good in our life. There might even be some Catholics who focus, you could say, too much on the spiritual to the exclusion of the other dimensions. Now, this is extremely rare because in the world, most people, unfortunately, pay little to no attention to the spiritual dimension, and that's awful. And so, again, to put prayer first in our life, reading sacred scripture, the sacraments, going to confession, this is most important. And then they say the second most important would be the emotional. So again, we're emotional beings. We need relationships. We need friendships. We need to invest in this. And all four of these dimensions, we have to be willing to invest in these. We have to prioritize them. Each one of these dimensions needs to be given attention and care, and very specifically time. We need to put time into the spiritual, through prayer, scripture, going to Mass and that, but also the emotional. If you're married, that needs to be a big priority in your life, and specifically putting time, spending quality time with your spouse, loving your spouse. And beyond that, every one of us, we're members of families. We need to, spend time and invest in our relationship with family members and also friends. And the kind of the comment that's a little comical is, you can't, like the emotional dimension of our life, you can't just pick that up all of a sudden. It takes really years of investment and care. You can't just decide all of a sudden, I need some really deep, caring, loving relationships in my life starting today. Well, listen, that takes time, and so we have to prioritize that. And then the third thing, so we spoke of the soul, the spiritual, the heart, the emotional, the intellectual. Each one of us, we're an intellectual being, and it's good for us to be lifelong learners, including in the spiritual, to grow in our faith. I tell Catholics, you should always have a good Catholic book on the go. It's like keeping a fire going. Every good book is like throwing another log on the fire. Typically, people who do good Catholic reading, their hearts are on fire, and their minds are preoccupied with things that are good and wholesome and holy. And so, but also it's good for us to have curiosities and other things, maybe studying some science or history or things like that. Again, we're intellectual beings, and if we want to flourish as a human being, we should be a lifelong learner, ongoing learners, and cultivate the intellectual dimension. And then finally, strength. This points to the physical dimension of our being. And again, it's easy to neglect this. And part of loving God is to eat healthy, to exercise regularly, to get good sleep. And so a person, maybe in the Catholic world who's so focused on the spiritual and just completely ignores the physical, that's not good. And again, the call to love is in each one of these areas. And so the idea is, the Lord calls us to self-knowledge. He calls us to living as humans, as He created us, and for us to flourish and to thrive as humans, we need to give each one of these dimensions the care, the attention, and the time they need, and to have the proper prioritizing. Again, the spiritual is the most important, and then the emotional, the intellectual, the physical. And when we obey this first and most important commandment, guess what? Our life is satisfying and fulfilling. And of course, we need to be doing all of these things with love. We need to pray with love, not just routinely. We need to, in our relationships, we need to love people with the love of God. Intellectually, we need to study and learn in a proper way, not like a vain curiosity or to puff up our pride. And physically, we need to work on the physical, but with the love of God, not in a vain way or something. So again, when we do this, obey this first commandment, we will find that we will experience the life in abundance that the Lord promises us.